My name is Lillian Hargrove. I'm 68 years old, retired from decades of teaching and school administration, and I've always prided myself on being careful with my finances. Every decision I've made since opening my first checking account was deliberate, calculated, and until this morning, trusted entirely to myself. The sunlight poured through my kitchen window as I sipped my coffee, the quiet hum of Seattle. Outside, a comforting backdrop. I had just settled into my morning routine, cup in hand, newspaper at the counter, phone unlocked in the other. Habitually, I tapped the banking app icon, expecting the familiar balance that had been my safety net for years. The screen flickered oddly. A notification popped up before I could fully register it, blinking at me with a warning I didn't understand. Account activity detected from an unrecognized device. My brow furrowed. Must be a glitch, I told myself. I refreshed the page. And then my heart stopped. Several withdrawals, large precise amounts had been made overnight. My retirement savings. The nest egg I had built meticulously over decades had been drained. Not partially, not a minor error, gone. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I double-checked the account number. Everything matched. And then I noticed something even more disturbing. My phone displayed an unfamiliar app running in the background, a program I had never installed with permissions that granted it total access. Spy software. I sank into the kitchen chair, gripping my phone with both hands, staring at the screen like it had betrayed me. A thought, raw and unbidden, crashed over me: my daughter. Could it really be her? I had trusted her with so little, shared a few tech tips here and there, added her for emergency alerts, but nothing that should have allowed her this level of intrusion. And yet the evidence was right there, undeniable. A wave of disbelief and fear rolled through me. Years of careful planning, every paycheck invested, every small sacrifice for security, all of it compromised. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman I raised with the actions staring back from my phone screen. I set my coffee down, barely touching it, and sat very still, my pulse hammering. I knew I couldn't act rashly, not yet. I needed to observe to understand the scope of what had been done. And as I stared at the blinking cursor of the unfamiliar app, I realized that the morning I had expected to be peaceful had already turned into the first of many battles I would have to face. The next morning, I woke with a restless edge that wouldn't shake. Seattle's overcast sky mirrored my mood as I brewed coffee carefully, setting my phone aside, though I couldn't resist stealing glances at it. Every notification felt like a potential trap. The thought that my daughter, someone I had raised and loved for decades, might be watching my every move made my stomach churn. Over the following days, subtle signs emerged. My banking app would open itself for a fraction of a second before I touched it. Notifications popped up from apps I didn't recognize sometimes during conversations or while I was cooking. At first, I questioned my own memory, wondering if I had installed something accidentally. But no, it was deliberate. I began observing my daughter quietly. She would linger near me when I used the phone, sometimes pretending to read a magazine, other times scrolling with exaggerated care as if ensuring I didn't notice. A small smile would cross her face when she thought I was distracted. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a twitch of her fingers, a glance at the screen too calculated to be casual. I spent hours examining the phone, digging into logs and permissions, trying to trace every digital footprint. There it was. Evidence of access from a device I didn't recognize, times when my phone had been active while untouched. The realization settled in with chilling clarity. This wasn't random or careless, it was orchestrated, and my daughter was at the center. Sitting alone in my kitchen one evening, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on her history of subtle control. Borrowed credit cards, returned late excuses for missing calls, small manipulations that had seemed harmless at the time. Patterns I had ignored now screamed in neon clarity. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the rain-soaked street below. I loved her, yes, but trust had been fractured in a way that couldn't be dismissed. I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I could confront her. Rushing into accusations would do no good. Not now, not ever. Clutching my phone, I resolved to watch record and wait. Every gesture, every notification, every shadow of her intent would be documented. For the first time in years, I felt the tension of a silent battlefield forming right under the roof I thought I shared with my family. I waited until dinner was finished, the clatter of plates and the hum of the dishwasher fading into silence before I spoke. My daughter Clara sat across from me, scrolling idly on her phone, the glow illuminating her face in the dim kitchen light. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and said, "Clara, I need to ask you something serious about my phone and my accounts." Her eyes flicked up at me, wary but guarded. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice casual, almost rehearsed. I could sense the subtle shift in her posture, the careful placement of her hands over the screen, the slight tightening around her eyes. "I've noticed activity on my phone that shouldn't be there," I continued slowly. "Apps opening on their own notifications from programs I didn't install, and large withdrawals from my retirement savings. Can you explain?" That Clara's expression tightened. A faint flush colored her cheeks. She leaned back, feigning surprise. "Mom, that's absurd. Why would I mean, are you sure it's not some kind of glitch? You've been paranoid about scams lately." Her words, meant to dismiss, carried a nervous edge. I studied her closely. The pause. The glance at the counter where my phone sat, charging the slight hesitation before she continued. "I would never do anything to hurt you," she said, softening her tone. "I care about you. Maybe it's just that new security update messing with the notifications." I pressed further, recounting the times I had seen her linger near my phone, the subtle gestures I had noticed over the past week. Clara's lips tightened, a shadow of frustration flashing in her eyes. "Mom, you're reading too much into things," she said sharply, twisting the conversation. "I'm just trying to help keep your devices updated. You've always worried about every little thing." I swallowed, the lump in my throat, the hurt and disbelief pressing down like a weight. I remembered the small ways she had manipulated me before, excuses to borrow credit cards, disappearing money from shared accounts, subtle pressure during bills and purchases. Patterns I had ignored now felt undeniable. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Her phone glowed in the dim light, a symbol of the invisible barrier between us. I felt the tension coil, the quiet betrayal, mingling with the love I still carried for her. This was no minor lapse, it was deliberate, and she was deflecting, twisting, trying to make me feel guilty for questioning her. I nodded, once keeping my voice even. "I'll need to see your explanation clearly," I said, my eyes meeting hers. She nodded slowly, but her gaze flicked to the floor, betraying the defensiveness she tried so hard to mask. I spent the next few days in quiet observation, retracing the subtle threads of Clara's past behavior that I had once brushed off as teenage mistakes or youthful carelessness. Small debts left unpaid, borrowed cards, returned late excuses about checking the house system when nothing needed monitoring. Each incident had seemed harmless, isolated. But now, seeing the evidence on my phone, a clearer picture emerged. I remembered the time she had insisted on using my laptop to help me set up an email account, only for me to later find folders she hadn't created. The way she lingered near my tablet, pretending to read a book, while secretly watching me navigate my finances. The subtle nudges whenever I checked bills, the offhand questions about which investments I monitored, all of it had built a pattern I had refused to recognize. Sitting at my desk one evening, I scrolled through months of app logs, noting each unfamiliar connection and timestamp. Each one was a silent confirmation. This was no accident, no harmless curiosity. Clara had been learning the rhythm of my routines, quietly mapping my access, subtly testing boundaries over time. The scale and precision of the current intrusions confirmed it. I ran my fingers over the phone, feeling a tight knot of frustration and disbelief. This isn't an accident. This is planned, I murmured to myself. It wasn't the anger that burned. Though it was there, it was the clarity. The sudden understanding of how long this had been happening. How carefully she had worked to infiltrate my life. Every small betrayal I had dismissed now became a piece of a larger puzzle. It was as if each minor act of control had been rehearsal. Each subtle manipulation, a rehearsal for the main performance she had orchestrated full access to my retirement savings. My trust had been systematically probed, my boundaries tested, and my vigilance underestimated. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, letting the frustration settle into focus. Emotional reactions would not serve me. I could not confront blindly or lose composure. I had to think strategically, track every digital footprint and document each irregularity. Only then could I reclaim control. Only then could I protect what was rightfully mine without giving her the satisfaction of a reactive outburst. The decision crystallized in my mind: observation, evidence, patience. This was no longer about suspicion, it was about preparation. Every past act, every tiny betrayal had led to this moment, and I would meet it on my terms. I spent the early morning hunched over my phone, examining the logs with meticulous care. Every timestamp, every background process, every unfamiliar device connection was a piece of evidence. The software Clara had installed was sophisticated far beyond what a teenager or even a 20-something might casually deploy. It had permissions that allowed her to monitor messages, track app usage, and most alarmingly, access my banking information. My pulse quickened as I realized how methodical she had been. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. By mid-morning, I had printed a spreadsheet of all suspicious activity, highlighting dates, times, and unusual patterns. I didn't want to accuse blindly. I wanted proof. And proof was exactly what I would need when the time came to confront her. I called my old friend Marcus, a retired IT security consultant I had met during my years organizing school technology workshops. I explained carefully what I had discovered. He listened quietly, then asked precise, pointed questions about device access, network permissions, and app behaviors. When I finished, he nodded gravely. "Lily, this isn't just spyware. It's full surveillance. She's been watching you consistently. You need to act, but carefully. Collect logs, preserve timestamps, and do not confront without concrete evidence." His words were both comforting and alarming. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. I felt a surge of determination. Fear had shifted into purpose. I spent the afternoon cross-referencing logs, taking screenshots, and creating a secure backup of every record. Each entry strengthened my resolve. Clara had been testing boundaries for years, but now I held the roadmap of her actions. Next, I drafted a plan. Step 1, secure my financial accounts, changing passwords and adding two-factor authentication. Step 2, restrict her access to my devices while maintaining plausible deniability until the confrontation. Step 3, prepare a calm, factual presentation of evidence for the conversation I would have with her. No accusations based on emotion. Everything would be documented, precise, and irrefutable. Even as I organized these measures, I paused to reflect. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Morally, I wrestled with the fact that she was my daughter. Emotionally, I wanted to believe she had made a mistake rather than a deliberate betrayal. But pragmatically, I couldn't let sentiment cloud judgment. The safety of my retirement savings and my peace of mind was paramount. By evening, my strategy was clear. I had transformed from a wary, anxious observer into a calculated planner. Every action was deliberate, every safeguard in place, and every potential move by Clara anticipated. For the first time since discovering the software, I felt a measure of control. The confrontation would come, but only when I was ready. I set the phone aside, breathing slowly, my mind already rehearsing the steps I would take. The pieces were all in place, and soon the truth would no longer be hidden in the shadows. I waited until the house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock filling the room. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her phone face down beside her, pretending to read a magazine. I placed my own phone carefully in front of me and took a deep breath. "Clara," I said, my voice calm, but firm. "We need to talk about my accounts and this software." Her eyes lifted wary, and a flicker of something fear, maybe guilt, crossed her face. I slid the first screenshot across the table, timestamps, device, IDs, app, logs. Each entry laid out the unauthorized access, every withdrawal, every instance she had monitored me. She froze. Her fingers twitched against the edge of the magazine, and for a moment the room held nothing but tension. "Mom, She started, then faltered, her eyes darting to the logs. "I didn't mean any harm," she said finally, voice low and uneven. "I thought I was helping. I didn't think it would get this far." Her admission sounded tentative, half defensive, half remorseful. She avoided my gaze, twisting her hands together. I was under pressure," she continued, "financial stuff at work, rent bills. I didn't know another way to keep track. I thought I could manage it without you noticing." I let her speak, listening carefully, the hurt coiling inside me, but tempered by the evidence in front of us. Years of subtle manipulation, small betrayals, and now this full-scale intrusion were undeniable. I set my hand firmly on the table, meeting her eyes. "Clara, you didn't just make a mistake. You violated my trust, my privacy, and my independence. You crossed a line that can't be ignored." She flinched, guilt flickering across her face. I'm sorry," she whispered almost too quietly to hear. But I didn't soften. I needed her to understand the weight of her actions. "This isn't about punishment," I said, my voice steady. "It's about accountability. You need to recognize the harm you caused, and you need to understand that this changes how we move forward. Your intentions don't erase the intrusion." Her shoulders slumped, and I saw a crack in the defensiveness she had carried for so long. For the first time, our roles shifted. I was no longer just a mother trying to guide her. I was a woman asserting her rights, her privacy, and her dignity. The dynamics of our relationship had been redefined in this moment. I gathered the device's logs and screenshots into a folder, sealing them as tangible proof of what had transpired. Clara's expression softened, the weight of accountability settling on her. We didn't speak for a long moment. The room hummed with quiet understanding, fragile but undeniable. The morning after our confrontation, I sat at my desk with a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. The house was still save for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I opened my laptop and began methodically changing passwords for every financial account I owned. Each new password was long, complex, and unique multi-factor authentication activated wherever possible. I felt a small thrill of satisfaction with every confirmation beep, as if reclaiming a piece of myself with each keystroke. Next, I moved through the devices. Clara's access to my phone, tablet, and desktop was revoked systematically. Notifications of changes were sent to her email accounts, understated and factual, without emotion. I wanted her to know the boundaries were firm, but I didn't need to add anger or blame. Precision was more powerful than theatrics. I paused to reflect. Love and betrayal were intertwined in our relationship, and I had to navigate both carefully. It wasn't about revenge, though. The satisfaction of control returning to my hands was undeniable. It was about protection, dignity, and the quiet assertion of my agency. I wasn't punishing Clara. I was safeguarding the life I had built for myself, the decades of savings, the security that no one, not even my daughter, could take from me again. Emails to her inbox were composed with care. One notified her of revoked device permissions, another confirmed the security updates on my accounts. Each word was neutral, factual, leaving no room for argument. I didn't linger on emotions. They were secondary to the clarity of action. I took a sip of coffee and allowed myself a moment to breathe. The tension that had gripped me for days loosened slightly, replaced by focus. I reviewed every account one last time, scanning for lingering access or unusual activity. Everything was in order. The quiet hum of my computer and the soft light of the morning were the only witnesses to the reclamation of control. As I sat back, I allowed a small, private smile. This was my space, my security, my rules. Clara had been given every opportunity to respect boundaries, and now the lines were drawn unmistakably. I didn't need to shout confront or demand compliance action, had spoken louder than words. For the first time since discovering the spy software, I felt a sense of empowerment, calm and measured, that could not be undermined. I had reasserted my authority over my finances and my life, and the subtle, deliberate measures I had put in place would ensure it stayed that way. The morning light spilled gently across the living room, and I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, watching the city wake beneath the misty Seattle sky. The house felt different now, calm, secure, and unmistakably mine. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic reminded me that life went on steady and predictable, just as I wanted it to be. I thought back over the past weeks, the discovery, the confrontation, the quiet measures I had taken to reclaim control. Each step had been deliberate, calculated, and ultimately empowering. I had navigated fear, frustration, and betrayal, but I had emerged with my boundaries intact and my independence firmly restored. The savings that once felt threatened now felt like a shield rather than a target. Clara had begun to recognize the limits I had drawn. Her tone was different now, careful, respectful. She hadn't apologized profusely, but her actions reflected awareness. The subtle shift in her behavior offered a tentative hope that our relationship could continue cautiously and on clearer terms. I allowed myself a small smile, thinking of the decades behind me, the sacrifices, the careful planning, the moments of quiet resilience that had brought me here. I realized that the strength I had cultivated over a lifetime was what had carried me through, and that same strength would guide the path ahead. The tea warmed my hands, and I felt a lightness I hadn't known in weeks. Life was not perfect, and the echoes of betrayal would linger, but the power to define my space, my finances, and my peace was fully mine. I would continue to nurture the bonds that mattered while protecting the ones I had fought to preserve. For the first time in a long time, I felt the clarity and quiet triumph of autonomy. The city outside moved on indifferent, but inside I had found my balance. I had weathered the storm, and now finally I could breathe.